The city was unnervingly quiet that evening. It wasn't the usual hum of distant traffic or the faint chatter of pedestrians on the sidewalk. No, this was something else. The streets were nearly empty, and the usual noise had been swallowed by the thick, heavy air. Even the wind had seemed to hold its breath, leaving the buildings around me strangely still. As I walked down the street, my footsteps echoed in the silence, amplified by the emptiness that stretched out ahead of me. I had been out late, later than usual, the night dragging on as I worked through another long shift. The office was quieter now, with most of my colleagues having long since left for the day. But I had stayed, buried in my thoughts and the soft glow of my desk lamp, making small progress on a report that had been haunting me for weeks. When I finally stepped out into the cool evening air, it was like stepping into a different world, one that was too quiet, too still. I noticed it immediately, the lack of sound. The usual evening noise, the hum of passing cars, the distant calls of people on the street, was missing. It was as though the city had been emptied, as though I were the only person left walking the streets. It felt unnatural, uncomfortable. My footsteps seemed louder than they should have, like they were the only thing that could be heard in the whole city. I looked around, half expecting to see someone, anyone, but the streets were empty. The shop windows were dark, the sidewalks deserted. I picked up my pace, a sense of unease creeping over me. It wasn't fear, exactly, but something else. A strange discomfort that came with the silence, the absence of life around me. The city, usually so full of noise, was now a ghost town, and the only thing that seemed alive was my own movement, my steps that echoed off the pavement as if they were bouncing back at me from some invisible place. I turned a corner, my shoes clicking sharply against the pavement, the sound ringing louder in the quiet. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that stretched down the road, and the silence seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive. With each step I took, the echo of my footsteps followed me, stretching out behind me like a shadow. It wasn't the usual rhythm of walking, it was distorted, like the sound was lingering longer than it should, stretching into the stillness. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see someone following me, but there was no one there. The street remained empty, the buildings closed off and lifeless. But the echo of my steps didn't stop. It was as if it was coming from somewhere behind me, almost as if I weren't walking alone. The sound followed me, repeating in time with my own movements, and for a moment, I wondered if I had lost track of the world around me. Was I hearing things? Had the stillness of the city made my senses dull? I continued walking, now faster, trying to shake off the strange sensation. But with every step, the echo grew louder, more insistent, as though something or someone was keeping pace with me. It was subtle at first, like the footsteps were just a fraction of a second behind mine. But soon, it felt like they were perfectly in sync with me, each step mirrored by the echo from behind. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat, and listened. The silence of the city pressed in on me, suffocating, but the sound of my own steps, no, the echo of my steps, kept going. It was as though I wasn't alone anymore. I spun around, heart pounding, my eyes scanning the empty street, but nothing had changed. There was no one there. No one following me. No one in the shadows. The city was still deserted, as silent as it had been when I first stepped out. And yet, the echo of my footsteps was there, trailing me, matching every step I took. I could hear it in my head now, not just from the street, but from inside, like the echo had settled into my thoughts, becoming part of the rhythm of my body. I tried to walk faster, but the echo followed, keeping pace with me, as if it had become a part of me. Every time I took a step, the sound would stretch behind me, the echo growing louder, more persistent. It was like a part of me had detached itself and was now trailing me, mocking me with its perfect imitation of my movement. I broke into a jog, hoping to outrun the echo, but it didn't stop. The sound of my steps, the sound of the echo, grew louder, filling the silence around me, ringing in my ears. I turned down an alley, hoping to break the pattern, but it was useless. The echo was there, stretching across the empty space, following me through every twist and turn. By the time I reached the end of the alley, my breath was ragged, my legs burning from the effort. I stopped, turning around once more, half expecting to find someone standing there, waiting for me, but again, the street was empty. There was no one. No one at all. And yet, the echo still clung to me, a constant reminder that something was wrong. I could still hear it, like a whisper behind me, as if I were walking in a world that didn't quite fit. The silence of the city was unnerving, but it was the echo that truly unsettled me. The way it stayed with me, persistent and unyielding, like it had become a part of the world itself. I reached my apartment building and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The sound of my footsteps stopped as I entered, the echo fading into the quiet of the hallway. For a moment, I stood still, listening to the silence around me. It was just as empty as the street outside. My heart was still racing, my mind trying to make sense of what had happened. The echo was gone, but the feeling remained. The city had been silent. And yet, the echo of my steps, my own steps, had followed me home. It had stayed with me long after the streets had emptied, and even now, as I sit in the quiet of my apartment, I can still hear it, faintly, in the back of my mind, as though it's waiting to return. And I can't shake the feeling that it will. That the echo of my steps is still out there, waiting for me to walk into it again. It was one of those mornings where the world felt muffled, like the universe itself had pressed the volume button down low. The kind of fog that drapes over everything, thick and heavy, swallowing the edges of the street and turning the familiar into a half-remembered dream. I was late for work, as usual, but the fog made everything feel slower, more relaxed, like time was willing to stretch out a little longer, as if the world were giving me a moment to breathe. The street was empty, save for the occasional silhouette of a car creeping along, its headlights slicing through the mist. I could barely make out the outline of the buildings that lined the sidewalk, shadows of shops and apartments that looked strangely unreal, like they were fading into the grayness. My footsteps echoed oddly in the stillness, the sound swallowed up almost immediately by the thick air. I was walking faster now, the chill creeping through my jacket, the dampness of the fog settling into my bones. I should have turned the corner to reach the subway entrance, but something made me pause, something in the fog that caught my eye. She was standing at the edge of the street, just a few feet away, barely visible at first. The fog curled around her like a shroud, and for a moment, she was nothing more than a vague shape, a woman in a long coat, her face obscured by the mist. She was looking down, her hands clasped together, but there was something about the way she stood there, so still, that drew my attention. I hesitated for a moment, watching her, wondering if she needed help. It wasn't unusual to see people standing in the fog, waiting for a bus or lost in thought, but there was something about her that felt different, out of place. I took a cautious step toward her. "Excuse me," I said, my voice breaking the silence in a way that felt too loud. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer right away. For a long moment, she didn't move at all. And then, slowly, her head lifted, and she turned toward me. When her eyes met mine, something inside me tightened, like a knot pulling on my chest. There was something unsettling about her gaze, something unreadable. It was as though she could see straight through me, as if she were looking at a version of me that I didn't even recognize. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and yet, there was a warmth to her expression that made me feel like I knew her, even though I was sure I didn't. "I'm lost," she said, her voice soft, almost distant, as though it had come from a great distance. "I can't remember where I'm supposed to go." I nodded, unsure of what to say. The fog felt thicker now, wrapping itself around us like a blanket. It was hard to tell if she was serious, if she was in trouble, or if she was just caught in the same strange stillness that had overtaken the city. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Are you looking for somewhere? I can help you." She didn't respond immediately. Her eyes seemed to drift past me, as if something beyond me had caught her attention. I waited, shifting on my feet, feeling more and more uncomfortable with each passing second. The fog swirled around us, thickening, turning the street even quieter than before. And then, in a voice so soft, it felt like it was only for me, she said, "I have to go." Before I could ask her where, before I could even process what she meant, she turned and began to walk away, slowly, as if the fog itself was pulling her deeper into its folds. I watched her move, her figure vanishing piece by piece, swallowed by the mist, until there was nothing left but the faint sound of her footsteps, fading into the distance. I don't know why, but I didn't follow her. Maybe it was the fog, or maybe it was something else, a sense of unease that settled deep into my stomach. I watched as she disappeared into the grayness, her figure becoming more and more indistinct, until she was gone. I stood there for a long moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air around me. I have to go. It wasn't just a statement. It felt like an instruction. Something important. But she was gone, and the street was empty again. I turned to continue my walk, but that's when it happened. Her voice, soft and distant, but unmistakably hers, whispered from behind me, carried by the fog. "Don't forget me." I froze. My breath caught in my throat as the words lingered in the air, ringing in my ears like a memory I couldn't quite place. I spun around quickly, but there was no one there. The street was as empty as before, and the fog seemed to press in even tighter now, as though it were hiding everything from view. I stood there, my pulse racing, my skin prickling with the cold. The voice had come from the fog, but it hadn't been close enough to touch. It had come from the very air itself, carried by the strange stillness that now felt like a weight, pressing on me, trapping me in this moment. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something had happened that I didn't understand. I looked down at the spot where she had been standing, but there was no sign of her, no trace that she had ever been there at all. Just the fog, the same as it had been when I first saw her. I told myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the fog had played tricks on my mind. But as I walked away, I couldn't escape the feeling that her voice was still there, lingering in the air behind me, just out of reach. "Don't forget me." I walked faster, my thoughts racing, the sound of my footsteps the only thing breaking the silence. The street felt emptier than before, the fog thicker, as if the world around me had shifted just slightly out of place. And as I passed the next corner, I glanced back. For just a moment, I thought I saw her again, standing at the edge of the street, her figure barely visible in the mist. But when I blinked, she was gone. I never saw her again after that day. The fog eventually cleared, and the city returned to its usual pace. But her voice stayed with me, haunting the corners of my mind, whispering when the night grew too quiet, when the fog rolled in thick again. "Don't forget me." And I wonder now, as I walk the streets, as the fog settles around me once more, was she ever really there? Or was it something else, something I'll never understand, waiting for me to remember, waiting for me to find her in the places where the fog lingers a little longer? It started as an ordinary day, one of those that blend seamlessly into the rest of the week. I woke up to the sound of my alarm ringing, groggy from a late night of work, and sluggishly went through my usual routine. I grabbed a quick breakfast, pulled on my jacket, and left for the office. The streets outside were wet from the morning rain, the air crisp and fresh in that way only fall mornings can be. The usual sounds of the city filled my ears, distant chatter, the honking of car horns, the hum of passing buses, and everything seemed normal, unremarkable. I walked down the familiar sidewalk, the same path I've taken countless times, heading toward the subway entrance at the end of the block. As I passed the old bookstore on the corner, the one with the faded sign hanging over the door, I absent-mindedly glanced through the window at the stacks of books inside. It was a comforting sight, the rows of yellowed pages and leather-bound covers. There was something about that bookstore, something that had always felt like a quiet anchor to me amidst the chaotic buzz of the city. I was lost in thought, walking quickly, my mind still half in the world of unfinished emails and tasks I hadn't completed, when I reached the crosswalk. The light was red, so I stopped and stood there, waiting, glancing absent-mindedly up at the towering buildings around me. The street was nearly empty, just a few cars parked along the curb, a couple of pedestrians strolling past, nothing unusual. The light changed, and I stepped forward, crossing the street. But as I reached the other side, something stopped me. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was that odd feeling you get when something in your peripheral vision catches your attention, just a flicker of motion that doesn't quite seem to belong. But for some reason, I turned my head. And that's when I saw it. Or rather, saw myself. I was walking ahead of me. The version of me that was walking down the sidewalk was almost identical, same clothes, same gait, same slouched posture. It was me, but it wasn't. The strange part wasn't that I saw someone who looked like me. It was that I saw myself from behind. I was walking a few paces ahead, just far enough that I could clearly see my own back, my own movement. The angle of my shoulders, the way my coat fluttered slightly with each step, it was all familiar, as though I were watching a reflection in a mirror. But there was something off about it. Something subtle. I froze in place, staring at the back of myself, my heart starting to pound in my chest. I couldn't look away. I thought, for a moment, maybe it was someone else, someone who happened to look exactly like me. But no. The closer I looked, the more certain I became. It was me. And yet, it wasn't. The figure ahead of me wasn't quite moving the way I moved. The steps were too regular, too mechanical, like the movement of someone who had already rehearsed the exact path I was walking. As I stood there, rooted to the spot, it took a turn that I didn't recognize, just a slight shift in direction, and then it disappeared down an alley that wasn't there a moment ago. I blinked, and the street seemed to return to its normal, quiet rhythm. People were walking, cars were passing, the world hadn't stopped. But my mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. I turned around, half expecting to find myself standing behind me, but the sidewalk was as empty as it had been before. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of confusion. It must have been a trick of the light, some kind of optical illusion. Maybe my mind had just been too tired, too overwhelmed by the day's demands. After all, I'd barely slept the night before, and I'd been pushing myself too hard. It made sense, right? I was probably just seeing things. But when I started walking again, my feet dragging slightly in the cold morning air, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the other me trailing behind, walking at the same pace, keeping step with me. But there was nothing. Or so I thought. I don't know how long I walked, trying to push the thought out of my head, but then the strange sensation hit me again. It was a prickling feeling at the back of my neck, a sudden awareness that someone, or something, was behind me. I didn't dare turn around immediately. I couldn't. But I could feel it. The weight of eyes on me, following my every step. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, I stopped and spun around. Nothing. The street behind me was empty. No one. No footsteps. No one walking toward me. It was just me, standing on the sidewalk, staring into the emptiness. I was shaking now. My pulse was racing. What was going on? I couldn't make sense of it. I stood there for a moment, half dazed, trying to tell myself it was all in my head. But the feeling lingered, the unease twisting in my stomach, that sense that I wasn't alone. That something, or someone, was just beyond my vision, standing there, waiting. I kept walking. At a faster pace now, my steps hurried, my head spinning with the thought that perhaps I was losing it, that my exhaustion was getting the best of me. I needed to focus. I needed to get to the office and forget about it. But then, as I neared the corner, I looked ahead, and I saw myself again. This time, I wasn't just behind me. I was walking ahead, the same pace, the same turn of my shoulders, the same slight swing in my stride. It was as though I had walked into my own future, into a moment that was unfolding exactly as it had already happened. I stopped dead in my tracks. My breath caught in my throat. There it was again. The version of me, walking ahead, turning the corner that I hadn't reached yet. It was too precise, too exact. Like a replay of a moment I had no memory of living, only the feeling that I had somehow crossed paths with myself. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, watching my other self turn into the alley again. Just like before. No. It couldn't be happening. It couldn't be real. I was losing it. That's all there was to it. But then, as I took a step forward, I noticed something else. Something that made the blood drain from my face. The alley where my double had disappeared, it wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't even on the map. The street had always been open, always led to the main road. The alley had appeared out of nowhere. I stumbled backward, my hands clutching at the nearest wall, my mind struggling to catch up with the panic spiraling inside me. The world felt unsteady, like the ground beneath my feet was shifting. I was no longer sure of anything, no longer sure that the path I was on was the one I was meant to walk. I tried to turn away, to get myself out of the city, out of the confusion, but the alley was still there in my mind, twisting its edges into something I couldn't escape. My heart was racing, my thoughts scattered, as I looked around desperately for something familiar, something that could anchor me back to reality. But in the quiet hum of the city, in the movement of the crowds around me, I felt that unmistakable pull again. I wasn't walking forward. I wasn't moving toward the future. I was already in it. And my past, my future, and I, were walking in sync. I turned down the alley, knowing full well what I would find. And as the air grew heavier with each step, I realized one simple truth: I wasn't just seeing myself ahead. I was seeing my future. And somehow, I was already in it. It was the kind of morning where everything felt quiet, almost too quiet. The sky was gray, heavy with the promise of rain, but it hadn't started yet. The streets were slick from an earlier shower, reflecting the dull glow of the streetlights, and the usual hum of the city seemed muffled by the early hour. I had woken up later than usual, rushing to catch the bus that would take me to work. I didn't mind the walk to the stop, it gave me a chance to clear my head before the day's chaos began. I reached the bus stop just as the clock struck 8, the familiar wooden bench under the shelter empty, just like it always was at this hour. The stop sat at the corner of a quiet street, where the buildings lined the sidewalk in neat rows, their windows dark and silent. There was no one else around, just the low buzz of the streetlight overhead and the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. It felt peaceful, a welcome contrast to the usual rush I'd felt that morning. I checked my watch, wondering if I was early or if the bus was running behind. It wouldn't be the first time. The bus was almost always late, and I had grown used to standing there, watching the minutes pass by. I tucked my hands into the pockets of my jacket, the cool air tugging at the collar of my coat, and I leaned back against the metal pole of the shelter, staring out at the empty street. But then, I heard it. My name. It was soft at first, just a whisper. Almost like the wind, but not quite. I froze, my head snapping toward the source of the sound, but there was no one there. The street remained empty, as still and silent as before. My pulse quickened slightly. I told myself it was just my imagination, the remnants of sleep still hanging in the back of my mind. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it. It had to be the wind or a passing car that I hadn't noticed, maybe the rustling of the leaves. I glanced up the street again, checking for any sign of life. The bus was still nowhere in sight, but the thought of being alone on such a quiet morning made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then it happened again. Sarah. It was clearer this time, louder, as if someone was standing just behind me, their voice soft but unmistakable. My heart skipped a beat, and I spun around, my eyes scanning the empty sidewalk. Nothing. There was no one. No one walking by, no one waiting at the stop. Just the faint hum of the streetlight and the distant sound of a car turning the corner. I swallowed hard, a lump rising in my throat. This was ridiculous. There was no one here. But why did I hear it so clearly? Why did I feel like someone was just out of my line of sight, waiting for me to turn around? I hesitated, my hand still gripping the strap of my bag, unsure of what to do. I wasn't scared exactly, just unsettled. I couldn't explain it. My name had come from somewhere close, and yet I couldn't find the source. The empty bus stop seemed almost too still now, as if the world around me was holding its breath. I took a step toward the edge of the curb, glancing both ways down the street, hoping to see the bus coming. But it wasn't there. And still, the feeling lingered, someone was there. Someone who knew my name, who was standing just out of sight. Sarah, the voice called again, this time more insistent, more familiar. It was as though it was trying to get my attention, trying to draw me in. I turned sharply, my breath catching in my chest. There was still no one. The stop was as empty as it had been before. The wind shifted slightly, ruffling my hair, but that was all. No footsteps, no passing shadow, no sign of anyone else. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing to make sense of it. The sound was so real, so clear. It wasn't a hallucination. It couldn't have been. But then why was the street so empty? Why was the bus still late, and why was I standing there alone, hearing voices when there was no one around? I glanced back down the street, and this time, something caught my eye. At the far end of the block, hidden in the dim light of the alley between two buildings, I thought I saw something moving. A figure, maybe, but it was too far to be sure. The shadows shifted, and for a moment, I thought I saw someone standing there, watching me. I stepped back from the edge of the curb, my pulse racing. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest, louder than before, as though it, too, was trying to keep time with the rhythm of the moment. I hesitated, wondering if I should just leave, if I should walk away and forget the strange voice that had called my name. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The bus was still nowhere to be seen. I glanced at the bench where I'd been standing earlier. Everything seemed still. Too still. I could feel the weight of the air around me, thick with something I couldn't name. Then, another noise. Faint footsteps. My head snapped toward the sound, and this time, I was sure it wasn't in my head. Someone was walking toward me. The sound was light but deliberate, the slow, rhythmic steps of someone walking casually, as if they knew I was waiting for them. I didn't look up immediately, not wanting to acknowledge it just yet. Maybe it was just a passerby, someone on their way to work, but the footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just behind me. And then I heard it again. Sarah. This time, it was so close that I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. My skin prickled with the sensation, and I turned sharply, my eyes wide, my heart pounding. But there was no one there. No one. The footsteps had stopped, the street was empty, and the world around me felt suddenly smaller, more confined. The air felt heavier, as if the very space between me and the empty street had thickened, pressing in around me. I felt the overwhelming urge to turn and leave, to run, but something in my feet kept me rooted to the spot. I glanced up at the bus sign again. It flickered weakly, like it was struggling to stay on, but still no bus. And then, finally, the thought that had been gnawing at the back of my mind bubbled to the surface. What if the bus wasn't the reason I was standing here? What if it wasn't the bus I was waiting for? The voice had called my name, asterisk not once, but twice star. And no one was here. No one else had shown up. The bus wasn't the point. The point was that I was waiting for something else. And now, standing there on the empty street, I couldn't help but wonder if the voice had been calling me to something. Or someone. Someone that I had never seen but had always known, standing just out of sight, waiting for me to turn around. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to step back. The voice had gone quiet now, as if it were satisfied that I had heard it. The air, though, felt heavy still, charged with something I couldn't understand. I didn't stay any longer to wait for the bus. Instead, I turned and walked quickly away, my footsteps echoing in the quiet street. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. That someone was still out there. Still calling my name. It started with a simple gesture, one that seemed ordinary at first. She handed me the key without explanation, just a small, rusted thing, the kind you would find in a forgotten drawer or tucked into the corner of an old wooden box. It felt heavy in my palm, cold against my skin, and for a moment, I thought I might just leave it on the table with the rest of the clutter. But there was something about the way she looked at me, her eyes steady, almost urgent, that made me slip it into my pocket without a second thought. I didn't know her well. Not really. We had met only a few times before, casual encounters, friendly conversations, nothing more. Yet, she always seemed to know things about me, little details that she shouldn't have. I never asked, never pressed her about it. But this time was different. This time, she looked at me as if she was waiting for something to happen, as though the handing over of that key was an important event, one that I was meant to understand. "Keep it safe," she said softly, her voice almost drowned out by the noise of the cafe around us. "You'll need it later." I didn't understand. But I nodded anyway, slipping the key into my coat pocket. I never questioned her, never asked what it was for. It was only a key, after all. How complicated could it be? That night, as I sat in my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The key, still in my pocket, felt heavier than it should. The air around me seemed thicker, colder, as if the walls were pressing in, squeezing out the familiar comfort of home. I sat at my desk, staring at the key, trying to make sense of what had happened. I didn't know why I felt compelled to do it, but I found myself standing up, walking toward the hallway closet where I kept a stack of old things, boxes of forgotten clothes, forgotten books, things I hadn't thought about in years. In the back, tucked under a pile of dust-covered blankets, I found an old wooden box. I hadn't seen it in months. It wasn't even something I remembered owning, yet there it was, sitting at the back of the closet like it had always been there. I opened it without thinking, and inside, resting in a bed of frayed velvet, was a small, rusted door, its intricate brass handle matching the key in my pocket. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the door, its tiny frame almost laughable in its impossibility. Why would a door be in a box, locked away in my closet? The same door I had never seen before, yet somehow, I knew it was meant for the key she had given me. A wave of unease washed over me, and for a moment, I hesitated. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what any of this meant. But the key burned in my pocket, urging me forward, as if something inside me already knew what needed to be done. I took the key from my pocket, holding it carefully in my hand, and walked to the box. Slowly, deliberately, I inserted it into the small keyhole of the door. The moment it clicked into place, I felt it, a strange, electric hum that seemed to pulse through the air, a vibration that resonated in my bones. My breath caught in my throat. I turned the key. The door opened. But instead of revealing a room, a passage, or anything at all that I could comprehend, I saw nothing. Just an endless void. Darkness stretched beyond the doorframe, deep and impenetrable, as though the door led to a place that had never been touched by light. There was no floor, no walls, no anything. Just the endless abyss of nowhere. I stood frozen, the door still open, the key still gripped in my hand, my mind racing with thoughts that wouldn't cohere. What was I supposed to do? What was I seeing? My apartment felt miles away, the walls closing in on me, my feet rooted to the floor as I stared into the void beyond the door. And then I heard it. A faint whisper, so soft it was almost imperceptible, carried on the stillness of the air. "Close it." The voice was so familiar, and yet I couldn't place it. The tone was calm, almost soothing, but there was an underlying urgency there. My breath quickened, and I felt my pulse race in my ears. The key in my hand felt like it was burning, as if I was holding something that didn't belong in this world. But I couldn't pull myself away. My hand, seemingly of its own accord, reached toward the doorframe, and the air around me grew colder, denser, as if something unseen was reaching out to grasp me. I didn't want to go any further, but I couldn't bring myself to close the door either. The void behind it was like a black hole, sucking in every bit of light, every scrap of reality. It was as though I had opened a door into something that shouldn't exist, something that had no place in the world I knew. The whisper came again, this time louder, more insistent. "Close it now." I yanked my hand back, finally breaking my trance. My fingers trembled as I fumbled for the door, shutting it as quickly as I could. The moment the door clicked shut, the room seemed to return to normal. The air grew warmer, the tension dissipated, and the weight of the key lifted from my palm. The apartment felt ordinary again, the walls once again solid and familiar. I stood there, staring at the door and the box, my chest heaving with relief. For a moment, everything felt quiet again, still. But I couldn't shake the sense that I had just barely escaped something. Something I wasn't supposed to know, something I wasn't supposed to see. And as I turned away, the thought settled in my mind, she knew star. She knew exactly what would happen, exactly what I would see, and exactly what I would feel. She had given me the key for a reason. She knew I would open it, knew I would walk right into that void. I had the strange sensation that the key wasn't just a key at all, that it wasn't meant to open anything in the physical world. It had opened something else, something other. A door to a place that wasn't meant to be touched, a door to nowhere. And as I looked back at the box, now closed and forgotten in the corner of the closet, I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if I opened it again? It was a typical Thursday evening when I first saw him. The kind of evening where everything feels just a little bit too ordinary. The streets were quieter than usual, and the air had that early fall chill to it. I had just finished a long day at work, my head buzzing with thoughts of emails and meetings. All I wanted was to get home, throw on some sweatpants, and relax for the evening. I was walking down the familiar street near my apartment, a narrow side street that I've walked countless times before. The streetlights flickered in the distance, and the rhythm of my footsteps was the only sound, broken only by the occasional hum of passing cars. I glanced around, taking in the usual sights, the coffee shop on the corner, the bakery with its warm, inviting glow from the window, the park bench where the elderly man with the cane always sits. Nothing out of the ordinary. And then I saw him. At first, he wasn't even someone I noticed in a meaningful way. Just another pedestrian, someone walking in the same direction as me. But as we passed each other on the sidewalk, I couldn't help but glance over. He was tall, with a broad frame, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His face wasn't immediately memorable, but there was something about the way he moved that caught my attention. It wasn't exactly his stride, but the way his eyes seemed to meet mine just as we passed, a brief but intentional look that sent a strange ripple through my chest. I kept walking, dismissing the feeling as nothing more than a fluke, a passing interaction in the blur of everyday life. I don't know why I remember this so clearly, but as I turned the corner towards my building, I glanced back for a second. That's when I saw him again. He was standing on the same sidewalk, a few feet away from where I had passed him earlier, but this time, he was facing the opposite direction. The exact same man, or so I thought, but there was something different about him. At first, I couldn't place it, but then it hit me, he was wearing a completely different outfit. This time, he wore a tan overcoat, a scarf draped loosely around his neck, and dark trousers. His jacket was now a lighter shade, almost beige. His shoes were polished leather, and he had on a pair of gloves, the kind that seemed too well maintained for the fall weather. His appearance was noticeably tidier, more refined, and yet it was the same man. Same build, same face, same movement, but a completely different outfit. The clothing wasn't just different, it felt like it belonged to a different time. I froze for a moment, my mind trying to piece together the impossibility of the situation. Was I seeing things? Was it a trick of the light? Maybe I was too tired, or perhaps I had imagined the first encounter. But no, the details were too clear. The way his eyes flickered in my direction again, the same slight tilt of his head as if he was observing me, even the way his hands were tucked in his pockets, just as they had been when I first saw him. And yet, the clothes. They were different. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it, before I forced myself to turn away. I didn't want to confront it. I didn't want to ask myself how or why this was happening. I just wanted to go inside, lock the door, and forget about it. But even as I walked into the building and up to my apartment, something about the encounter lingered. I didn't mention it to anyone, how could I? It sounded insane, even to me. And in the days that followed, life moved on. The feeling of unease faded into the background, pushed away by the usual routine. But the second time I saw him, things were different. It was a week later, and the weather had turned colder, the first signs of winter creeping in. I was walking to the same street again, heading to the store to pick up a few things. The moment I stepped onto the sidewalk, I saw him again. And this time, he was standing outside the same coffee shop I'd walked past earlier, the one with the warm glow from the window. He was dressed differently again. This time, he wore a dark gray suit, a sharp tie, and a fedora perched on his head. His expression was more intense now, his eyes scanning the street with a quiet focus that made me feel as though I was being observed. But there was something unsettling about it this time, more than before. I could feel my heartbeat quicken as my steps faltered. Was he following me? Was this some strange coincidence? Or was there something else at play here? I kept walking, hoping he wouldn't notice me, but as I passed by, I couldn't help but glance over at him. For a split second, I could have sworn his gaze locked onto mine. He was standing still, not moving, just watching me with a look that was almost too deliberate. I shook my head, dismissing it as paranoia. I couldn't let myself get caught up in this. But deep down, something inside me was starting to unravel. Something was wrong, something about the way this stranger kept reappearing in different outfits, in different places. I didn't go to the store that day. Instead, I turned around and went back home, as quickly as I could, my mind racing with questions I didn't have the answers to. Was I going crazy? Was I imagining this? Or was something truly strange happening? The third time I saw him was just as inexplicable, and it only confirmed the feeling I had been trying to ignore. This time, it was in the park near my building. It was a Saturday afternoon, the sun barely shining through the gray clouds. I was out for a walk when I saw him again, sitting on one of the benches, dressed in a different set of clothes. This time, he wore a black leather jacket, dark jeans, and boots, like he belonged to a completely different world. But it was him. I could feel it. The posture, the way he sat, the way he moved, the way his eyes, those eyes, searched the space around him with a quiet, calculating intensity. He hadn't seen me yet. I stopped, my heart pounding, unsure of what to do. I wanted to approach him. I wanted to confront him, to ask him who he was, what he was doing, why he kept changing his clothes and appearing in places where I had no business seeing him. But something held me back. It wasn't fear, not entirely, it was more like an overwhelming feeling of helplessness. The kind of sensation you get when you realize you've stepped into something far too deep, something you can't control. Instead, I turned around and left, my legs carrying me faster than they should have. I didn't look back. When I got home, I tried to forget about him, but it was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his eyes, and the strange way he kept showing up, each time in a different set of clothes, each time in a different place. I couldn't escape him. And I couldn't shake the feeling that, no matter how much I tried to forget, he would keep reappearing, watching, waiting. And the worst part? I realized something. I wasn't just seeing him in different clothes. He was seeing me, too. Every time, his gaze had never wavered, never faltered. He was waiting for me to acknowledge him. Waiting for me to notice. But I had no idea what that meant, or why I kept running into him. All I knew was that the more I saw him, the less I knew who I was anymore. But now, it seemed wrong. It was longer than it should be, stretching unnaturally across the sidewalk, as though it had taken on a life of its own, following me, mimicking my every movement. But there was a sharpness to it now, something jagged in its form that hadn't been there before. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was no longer my shadow at all. My heart began to beat faster. I stepped forward again, my breath coming a little quicker now, as if the space around me had suddenly shrunk. My shadow followed, but this time, it didn't simply mirror my movement. As I walked, it stretched out farther than it should have, reaching toward the spot where the streetlight had been, where the light no longer touched. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it began to shift. The edges of my shadow rippled, like liquid, as though it were no longer just a reflection of me, but something else, something with its own form, its own will. The longer I stood there, the more it seemed to stretch, to reach, to stretch further out toward the empty corner, until the shadow felt as though it had a mind of its own. A darkness in the shape of my own movements, but twisted, warped in ways I couldn't understand. I took a few shaky steps back, my breath shallow, my chest tight with unease. My shadow didn't follow. It stayed where it was, stretching outward. And in that moment, I felt a strange compulsion, a pull, a whisper, urging me to move closer to the shadow. I stepped forward again, this time hesitantly, but my shadow didn't shrink back. It stretched farther out with me, reaching into the dark emptiness of the street, filling the space between me and the cold, dim corner of the street. It felt like it was waiting for me to cross the line, to step into the dark, to reach out and make contact. And I wanted to, no, I needed to. I needed to understand it. What had happened to my shadow? Why wouldn't it follow me like it always had? I paused, standing there in the sudden darkness, the world around me growing quieter, more isolating. The night air felt colder now, the absence of the light seeping into the space around me. I looked around, but the other lights down the street were still on, casting long, pale shadows across the pavement. Just the one light had turned off, and I wondered if maybe it was just an electrical glitch. It wasn't uncommon for older streetlights to fail, especially on a night like this, when everything seemed to be wrapped in an eerie stillness. I turned to continue walking, my thoughts drifting back to the comfort of my warm bed, when I felt it, a strange sensation that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was as though something had shifted in the air, something subtle but unsettling. I glanced down at the pavement beneath my feet. My shadow was still there. It was faint at first, just a flicker of a shape stretched long across the sidewalk, but as I stood there, the shadow seemed to grow more pronounced, more defined. I could see the outline of my figure, the curve of my shoulders, the angle of my head. But the light was gone. The streetlight above me had turned off, and there was no other source of illumination. The other lights down the street were too far away to cast any meaningful shadow here. I stepped forward cautiously, my eyes fixed on the shadow beneath me. It followed my movements, stretching and shrinking with every step, as it always did. But then, it didn't stop. It didn't fade when I stopped moving. It stayed there, stretching out ahead of me, still visible despite the absence of the streetlight. A chill ran down my spine as I took a slow step backward. My shadow remained fixed in place, unmoving, as though it were waiting. I turned around quickly, searching the dark street for any sign of movement. Nothing. The only sound was the distant hum of the city, faint and far away. I looked back down at my shadow again. Still there. But now, it seemed wrong. It was longer than it should be, stretching unnaturally across the sidewalk, as though it had taken on a life of its own, following me, mimicking my every movement. But there was a sharpness to it now, something jagged in its form that hadn't been there before. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was no longer my shadow at all. My heart began to beat faster. I stepped forward again, my breath coming a little quicker now, as if the space around me had suddenly shrunk. My shadow followed, but this time, it didn't simply mirror my movement. As I walked, it stretched out farther than it should have, reaching toward the spot where the streetlight had been, where the light no longer touched. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it began to shift. The edges of my shadow rippled, like liquid, as though it were no longer just a reflection of me, but something else, something with its own form, its own will. The longer I stood there, the more it seemed to stretch, to reach, to stretch further out toward the empty corner, until the shadow felt as though it had a mind of its own. A darkness in the shape of my own movements, but twisted, warped in ways I couldn't understand. I took a few shaky steps back, my breath shallow, my chest tight with unease. My shadow didn't follow. It stayed where it was, stretching outward. And in that moment, I felt a strange compulsion, a pull, a whisper, urging me to move closer to the shadow. I stepped forward again, this time hesitantly, but my shadow didn't shrink back. It stretched farther out with me, reaching into the dark emptiness of the street, filling the space between me and the cold, dim corner of the street. It felt like it was waiting for me to cross the line, to step into the dark, to reach out and make contact. And I wanted to, no, I needed to. I needed to understand it. What had happened to my shadow? Why wouldn't it follow me like it always had? But as I stood there, caught between the unsettling pull of the shadow and the growing realization that something was terribly wrong, I heard something else. A sound. It was faint at first, like a rustle, a whisper just at the edge of my hearing. I turned my head slowly, scanning the empty street behind me. But there was no one there. No footsteps. No movement. The air was still. The sound came again, soft, as if from just behind me. Asterisk whispering my name. Asterisk the voice was faint, distant, but it was unmistakable. Turn back. It was the same voice that had whispered to me before, when I had first stopped at the corner, when the streetlight had flickered out. It came from the darkness now, from the shadows I could no longer escape. I turned around to run, my legs moving before my mind could catch up. But as I did, I saw the shadow in my peripheral vision stretch even further, asterisk too far star. I stumbled backward, falling to the ground, my hands scraping against the wet pavement. My heart raced in panic, but the whispering voice grew louder now, echoing in my head, everywhere. I looked up, and there it was, right in front of me. The shadow. No longer just a reflection of me, but something more. It had taken form, shaping itself into a figure, tall and wide, its edges distorted and jagged. I scrambled to my feet, backing away into the dark street, but the shadow followed. The voice whispered again, as though it were no longer in my ear but inside my mind, inside my very bones. "Stay with me," it said. I ran. The pavement blurred beneath my feet, the cold night air rushed past me. But no matter how fast I ran, no matter how many blocks I put between myself and the empty street, I couldn't escape it. The shadow clung to me, following me through the dark, its presence unmistakable, persistent. And when I finally reached my apartment, I didn't look back. I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me, my breath still ragged, my body trembling with fear. But when I glanced at the reflection in the hallway mirror, there it was again. My shadow. It lingered, stretched out unnaturally long, casting its jagged form across the floor, even though the room was bathed in light. I don't know how long it stayed. But I do know that it never left. Not completely. Even now, in the safety of my home, I still feel it. The shadow. The whisper. The presence, waiting. It was one of those nights where the air is thick with dampness, and the streetlights glow faintly through the mist, casting long, ghostly shadows across the road. I had just finished up an evening meeting, one of those that drags on longer than it should, and I was walking home through the empty streets, the kind of streets that are only busy during the day. The city felt quiet, a little hollow at night, with only the distant hum of traffic on the main roads. The rain had stopped, but the wetness lingered in the air, clinging to everything. I could feel the moisture on my skin, a chill that didn't quite belong in the summer. As I walked along the familiar path, the sound of my footsteps was the only thing that kept me company. The sidewalks were slick with rainwater, reflecting the soft light from the street lamps. The houses on either side of the street were dark, their windows like black eyes watching, waiting for something, or nothing. The street seemed empty, as it always did at this hour, and yet tonight felt different. It was like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something I couldn't see. I was just a block away from my apartment when I heard it. It was a whisper. Soft, faint, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me after a long day. But then I heard it again. Sarah. My name. Clear as day. And it came from somewhere, behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat, and I turned quickly, my eyes scanning the street, the shadows between the houses, the empty road stretching out before me. The street was still empty. No one. The silence wrapped itself around me, pressing in from all sides. I waited, my breath caught in my throat, my feet frozen to the spot. For a long moment, nothing moved. The only sound was the soft tapping of rainwater dripping from the eaves of the houses onto the pavement. It was like the street was holding its breath, too, waiting for something to happen. I started walking again, slower now, my footsteps hesitant, as if my body knew something my mind didn't want to accept. I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of the wind or a stray thought that had somehow made its way out of my mind and into the world. I could almost convince myself that I hadn't heard it, that it hadn't been my name at all. But then it came again. Sarah. The voice was clearer this time. It was a whisper, but it was there. Close. Too close. I froze again, a chill running down my spine. This time, I didn't turn around immediately. I stood perfectly still, my heart hammering in my chest. The whisper was so faint, so soft, yet so clear in the empty night. It didn't make sense. No one was there. The street was still empty. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. I don't know how to explain it, but I could feel eyes on me, like someone, or something, was watching me from the shadows. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I suddenly felt very small, very vulnerable. The sense of being seen was overwhelming, like I had just stepped into someone else's story, one where I wasn't the main character. I didn't know what to do. My feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, caught between the fear of looking and the fear of not knowing what was behind me. Sarah, the voice came again. It was soft, but it was also urgent, like it was trying to pull me in. I couldn't tell if it was real or just my mind playing tricks, but it felt real. Too real. I turned around. The street was empty. The light from the nearest street lamp flickered, casting an eerie glow over the pavement, but there was no one there. No one standing in the shadows, no movement from the houses, no sound except for the steady drip of rainwater. The street seemed untouched, unchanged. But somehow, the quiet felt off. It wasn't the same silence that usually comforted me after a long day. This silence was heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. I took a deep breath and started walking again, my pace quicker now, my eyes scanning the street with every step. My mind was telling me to get home, to lock the door and forget this ever happened. But the feeling of being watched lingered, pressing against me, crawling under my skin. I almost made it to the corner when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a whisper. "Sarah, don't." The voice was not the same as before. It was lower, more commanding, but still so soft, like a thread of sound woven through the night. It didn't come from the street behind me anymore. It came from ahead, just around the corner. My heart leapt into my throat. The voice didn't belong to anyone I knew. It didn't sound like it was from a human being at all. I stopped again, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I could feel the weight of the night pressing in on me, making everything feel distorted, unreal. The street felt too quiet, too still. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Something was out there, something watching me, waiting for me to follow. I hesitated. I didn't know what to do. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, to run home, but there was something in my feet that wouldn't let me. The urge to move forward was just as strong as the need to retreat, like I was being pulled by invisible strings. The whisper came again, softer now, as if coaxing me closer. "Don't be afraid, Sarah." I took a deep breath. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to know what was waiting for me around that corner, but my body moved on its own, like it was being guided by something outside of my control. I stepped forward, just a little, and then froze again. For a split second, I thought I saw something, a figure standing just past the streetlight, barely visible in the shadows. It was so quick, just a flicker of movement, like something had shifted in the dark, but it was enough. Enough to make my heart race even faster, enough to make my legs feel weak under me. I stepped backward, my breath quickening, my chest tightening. I didn't want to see what was waiting around that corner. I didn't want to be part of whatever this was. But as I turned to leave, I heard it once more, louder this time, as if it were standing just behind me, breathing my name. "Sarah." I whipped around, but there was nothing. Just the empty street. Just the shadows stretching long across the pavement. The light flickered again, casting a brief flash of light on the wet road. And then, for a moment, I thought I saw it. A shape. A silhouette, standing in the dark at the end of the street. It was tall, indistinct, but there was something about it that felt wrong. Something off about the way it was standing there, like it wasn't meant to be in this world at all. I didn't wait to find out more. I turned and ran. My footsteps echoed loudly in the silence as I hurried toward the corner, toward the relative safety of the next block, and I didn't stop until I was inside my apartment, the door locked behind me, the world outside shut out. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just my imagination, just a trick of the dark. But deep down, I knew what I had heard. I knew the voice wasn't a trick. It wasn't the wind or a passing car. It was someone, or something, that had been waiting for me, calling my name, waiting for me to walk just a little closer. And now, even with the door locked, the windows shut tight, and the lights on, I can still hear it. "Sarah." Whispering, just outside my window. It was a quiet evening, and I was walking home after another long day at work. The kind of day that had taken more out of me than I'd expected, though there was nothing unusual about it. It had rained earlier, but the sky had cleared, leaving behind that lingering dampness that makes everything feel slightly unreal. The streets were quieter now, the distant hum of traffic the only thing that seemed to break the evening stillness. As I walked down the familiar stretch of road, I noticed the small shop on the corner, *Wrights Groceries and More Star. I had passed by it dozens, maybe hundreds, of times in the last few years. It wasn't a particularly special store. It was a small, narrow building with slightly faded blue paint, the windows cluttered with old promotional signs for sales I'd never paid much attention to. Still, there was something about it that caught my eye, as it often did. Something about the way the light from the street lamp seemed to shine just a little brighter when it reflected off its glass windows. I slowed my pace, my gaze drifting to the half-open door, the scent of bread and something else, something sweet, mingling faintly with the cool air. For a moment, I considered going in, maybe grabbing a snack or a drink to unwind after my long day. I wasn't in a hurry, I had time. But then something unusual happened. I glanced away, just for a second, and when I looked back at the store, I noticed a strange detail. The sign in the window, asterisk writes groceries and more asterisk, it looked different. Not the lettering itself, but the way it had been positioned. The letters didn't quite line up the way I remembered them. The edges of the sign were fraying in a way they hadn't been before, and the old marks from years of weathering seemed more pronounced, as if the store had been around much longer than I had thought. I blinked, wondering if I was just tired, but as I took a few more steps forward, I felt a sense of unease settling into the pit of my stomach. My mind was starting to race, and I couldn't explain why. It was just a store, just a small, ordinary part of the neighborhood. But why did it feel different now? I stopped just a few feet away from the door, still unsure of why I had hesitated. The light was soft, casting long shadows across the pavement. The store seemed almost to be waiting for me to do something, step inside, leave, take another look, but for some reason, I couldn't quite bring myself to move. It was like I was waiting for something to happen. Without thinking, I turned and began walking away, hoping to shake the feeling off. The store faded into the background as I walked further down the street, my thoughts beginning to wander again. I tried to focus on the mundane, how much further I had to go before I reached my apartment, whether I needed to stop for groceries, but there was something about that shop, something about the way it had seemed to shift in the span of a few seconds, that kept pulling at my mind. It wasn't until I reached the next intersection, and I had completely forgotten about the store, that I realized something strange. I had already walked past this street corner once that day, right after work, heading in the same direction. I hadn't stopped at the store then, but I remembered passing it. I remembered glancing at the familiar sign, the way the dimming sunlight had made everything feel hazy, just like it always did at that time of day. But now, as I thought back, I couldn't shake the feeling that the store hadn't looked like it had when I passed it earlier. The sign, the window, everything about it felt off. I turned back around and began retracing my steps. My feet felt heavier with each step, as though the pavement itself was somehow resisting me, and by the time I reached the corner, I felt a deep sense of confusion. There it was again, the same store. But this time, it looked just as it had when I had walked past it before, hours ago. The sign in the window, the door slightly ajar, the faint glow from the lights inside, all of it was perfectly familiar. I stood there for a moment, watching it, my breath coming out in small, uncertain puffs. Maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe it was just exhaustion. After all, it had been a long day. My mind was probably playing tricks on me, twisting what was ordinary into something strange. I took a few tentative steps toward the store, telling myself it would be fine. I'd just go in, buy something simple, maybe grab a bag of chips or a drink to put my mind at ease. But the closer I got, the more disorienting the store felt. The door was still open, but there was something unsettling about it, as if it were waiting for me to cross the threshold and step into a space I wasn't meant to enter. I stopped in my tracks, unsure of what to do next. And then, just as I was about to turn around again, the bell above the door jingled. It was the faintest sound, almost like a whisper in the silence, but it sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't seen anyone enter or exit the store. No one was behind the counter. In fact, I hadn't seen a single person inside since I'd first noticed the store. Yet the bell had rung, as though someone had stepped in. It echoed in the air, stretching out longer than it should have, almost as if it were calling me. My feet were moving again before I could stop them, drawn forward by the sensation that the store wanted me to come inside. Some part of me, told me that if I didn't go in now, I might never understand what was happening. The lights inside flickered just a little, and for a moment. I thought I saw the figure of someone standing near the back of the store, just out of sight. But when I blinked, the figure was gone. I stepped forward. The door swung open without a sound, and as I crossed the threshold, the cool air from inside hit me like a wave. The smell was the same, a mix of baked goods and something metallic, but there was a strange undertone now, something sour, like old dust, the kind of smell that comes from things that are kept too long in dark corners. The shelves were lined with products I didn't recognize, labels faded and curling at the edges. The space inside felt wrong. The walls seemed to bend slightly, and the dim light gave everything a soft, dreamlike quality. The store was familiar, but it was not the store I had passed by earlier. It was something else, something hidden beneath the surface, something that I couldn't quite grasp. I felt my heart race in my chest, my palms sweating as I stood in the doorway. And that's when I heard it, a soft, almost inaudible voice, like someone whispering from the back of the store. "Come in," it said. "It's all the same." I froze. The voice was gentle, yet it carried a strange weight. It was the voice of someone who knew me, who had been waiting for me to arrive. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I took a step back, suddenly unsure of whether I was truly ready to enter. But as I did, the bell above the door jingled again. The same faint, haunting chime, and for the briefest of moments, I thought I saw the shadows move inside the store, like something was shifting. I stood there, caught between fear and curiosity, and for what felt like an eternity, I couldn't decide whether to go in or leave. And then, almost as if the decision had been made for me, I turned away, my legs trembling beneath me. As I walked back down the street, my heart pounding, I couldn't shake the feeling that the store was still watching me, waiting for me to come back, to step inside again. But when I looked over my shoulder, the store was just a store again. Ordinary. Quiet. Unchanged. Except, when I passed it the next day, I could swear that the sign in the window had shifted again. The letters were a little crooked this time, as if they were subtly rearranging themselves. I didn't go back inside. But something tells me the store is still waiting for me, somewhere, just around the corner. The air was thick with humidity as I descended into the subway station. It was one of those summer nights where the heat clings to everything, even the cool, artificial air of the underground. The overhead lights buzzed slightly, their dull yellow glow making the worn tiles and chipped signs seem even older than they were. I was tired, having just wrapped up a long day at work, and all I wanted was to get home, slip into bed, and forget about the stress of the day. I glanced at the clock on the wall, still 10 minutes until the next train. I was going to be fine. I could already imagine the cool breeze of my apartment, the comforting quiet of a night spent alone. But I wasn't in a hurry. No, I had time to just stand there and breathe, my thoughts drifting in and out, the rhythm of the station's usual sounds lulling me into a sense of routine. The low murmur of distant conversations, the occasional shuffle of someone's shoes against the tile, the screech of the turnstiles as they opened and closed with a soft metallic sigh, it all felt so familiar. In a way, it was comforting, this predictable hum of life beneath the city. The subway stations never change. You wait, the train comes, you board, and you leave. Simple, efficient, almost mechanical. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, briefly checking for messages as I leaned against the pillar. There was a small group of people waiting with me, some standing by the platform's edge, others sitting on the benches, staring ahead at the empty tracks. The usual characters, a man with his headphones, a young woman with her head buried in a book, an older couple chatting quietly. I let my gaze wander over the signs posted around the platform, reminders about ticket validity, warning to watch for gaps between the train and the platform, all those little notices that blend into the scenery when you've passed them enough times. And then it happened. I heard the rumble first. Low at first, barely a tremor, but then growing louder. The lights in the tunnel flickered for a split second, and I looked up instinctively. I wasn't the only one, everyone seemed to turn at once, as though this moment had been perfectly choreographed. The noise of the approaching train filled the air, vibrating through the platform like a pulse. The ground under my feet rumbled, and I felt a strange anticipation building, a sensation that had nothing to do with the exhaustion of the day. There was something about the way the train was coming, something off. The train slid into view, its headlights cutting through the tunnel, blinding for a moment as they illuminated the dark. But something was wrong. I couldn't quite place it at first. It was the shape, the colors. The train itself was old, like one from decades ago, worn and faded, with a livery I had never seen before. It wasn't the sleek, modern subway cars I was used to. This one was bulky, industrial, and somehow, out of place. The metallic surface of its sides gleamed in a way that felt too clean for the station, too new in a space so grimy and lived in. The doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, and that's when I realized there were no passengers inside. The train was empty. That wasn't the most unsettling part, though. No, it was the fact that the doors weren't even supposed to open yet. The train I had been waiting for was supposed to come from the other side of the platform. I checked the digital sign again, still flashing the expected train arrival time, still showing the usual line, the same route I had taken countless times before. And yet here this train was, appearing from the opposite direction, as though it had come from somewhere else entirely. Somewhere I didn't recognize. My heart thudded harder in my chest. I hesitated. People around me seemed oblivious, standing up to board the train without a second thought. The older couple shuffled toward the train, the woman smiling at her husband, oblivious to anything odd. The man with the headphones glanced. But I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the platform, my body stiff with a kind of quiet panic that I couldn't shake. There was a moment, a brief, fleeting second, when I considered walking away, when I thought I might just leave and catch a bus home, as if I could somehow outrun the discomfort that the strange train had started to settle in my chest. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I watched the doors slowly close with a faint, almost apologetic sound, like they were closing not on passengers, but on something else. Something empty. The train started moving again, gliding silently down the tracks. I followed it with my eyes, and for a moment, I felt as though the air around me had thickened. There was a pressure, a weight on my chest that hadn't been there before. It was like the whole station had gone still, like even the lights were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. And then it happened. The man with the headphones was gone. The woman with the book, gone. The couple that had been headed for the train? They vanished, too, as if they'd been erased, pulled out of the air like a scene in a movie that had been cut at the last minute. The only person left standing on the platform was me. Alone. The subway had emptied out completely in an instant, and all that was left was silence. I glanced at the now closed doors of the train as it slowly disappeared into the tunnel, the rumble of its wheels echoing away. It was as if nothing had happened at all, no strange train, no disappearing people. Just a train heading off to wherever it had come from. The platform was still. Empty. I stood there, trying to catch my breath, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the edge of the pillar. My mind was racing now, caught between the need to convince myself it had all been a mistake, some trick of the light, some misinterpretation of what I had seen. But I knew it wasn't that. I had seen what I had seen. I had watched it happen. I pulled my phone out again, checking the time. Just as before, the train I had been waiting for was supposed to arrive. The clock read the same as it had before, the numbers blinking steadily, quietly, patiently. I looked up again, half expecting to see someone else walk in, someone who would explain what had just happened, what that train had been, why it had appeared. But there was no one. The station remained empty. And then, to my horror, I noticed something else. The track where the strange train had disappeared had changed. The rail was different now, older, the paint chipped and rusted, the wooden planks beneath it worn down to nothing. The direction the train had gone was not the same as the one listed on the sign. It didn't match the route at all. The subway had altered itself, had bent around some corner of reality I didn't understand. It was no longer a simple place where trains arrived and departed, it had become something else entirely. I stood there, frozen in the sudden, suffocating realization that the world around me had shifted, and I had no idea how or why. I wasn't waiting for a train anymore. No, I was waiting for something else to happen. Something far worse, something I couldn't explain. The next train arrived at the expected time, but it was just another train, its usual carriages, its usual people, none of them acknowledging the strange interruption I had witnessed. I stepped on, numb, my mind still trying to piece together the impossible, the illogical, the unnerving reality I had just experienced. I tried to ignore the feeling that gripped me as the doors closed behind me. That sinking sensation that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't just missed my train. Maybe I had missed something far more important. Her eyes were so focused, so intent on me, that it felt like she was pulling me into her orbit. I glanced back at the traffic light, still red, still unmoving. The kind of light that invites impatience. My eyes flicked to the woman again. She hadn't moved. She still just stood there, her gaze unwavering. It was as if she had been waiting for me to notice her, waiting for me to understand something. Then she spoke, just as quietly as the drizzle around us, her voice cutting through the space between us. "Wait for the light," she said. Her words were simple, like a command, but somehow they felt heavy, pressing down on me. I had no idea why, but I nodded. I didn't speak. I don't know why I didn't speak. I just nodded, as if it made sense. And then, without saying another word, she stepped backward, out of my line of sight. I could hear the faint tap of her shoes on the wet pavement as she moved, but when I looked again, she was gone. Just like that. I stood there, staring at the crosswalk. The light was still red. But now, there was something else about it. Something wrong. It had been red for a while, sure, but now it felt like it wasn't going to change. Like it was stuck. Time felt like it had stretched thin, like I was suspended in it, waiting for something to happen that never would. I waited. The rain had stopped, but the air felt colder, heavier. I started thinking about the woman. I could barely picture her now. Her face seemed to blur the longer I stood there, as if she had never really been there to begin with. I told myself I should leave, to walk away, but I couldn't bring myself to. The crosswalk felt like the only place left to be. I wanted to cross to the other side, but the light stayed stubbornly red, flickering on and off in a strange pattern that didn't make sense. Minutes passed. Maybe more. I started to feel like I was in a loop, trapped in a moment that kept repeating itself. The crosswalk remained the same, the road stayed empty, and the light never changed. I began to wonder how long I had been there, or how much longer I would stand there, waiting. I couldn't tell if I was frozen in place or if the world around me was moving too slowly. The sound of distant footsteps drew my attention back to the street. Someone else was approaching the crosswalk. A man, with an umbrella tucked under his arm, moving at a slow pace. I watched him as he got closer. He wasn't in a hurry, either. In fact, he seemed oddly calm, as if he had all the time in the world. He didn't seem to notice me at first, but then he stopped, right next to me, just as I had. He glanced up at the traffic light. "Does it ever change?" he asked, his voice soft. I shook my head, the words forming in my throat before I even realized I was going to say them. "It doesn't," I said. "It hasn't. I've been waiting." He frowned slightly, looked at the light, and then glanced back at me. His expression softened, a bit confused, but it was almost like he understood. Like he knew what I was talking about. And then he did something strange. He looked over his shoulder, as if checking something behind us. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. No one. The street behind us was empty, as it had always been. He nodded, as if satisfied with something unseen, then turned and began walking away, back toward the direction he had come from. I watched him for a moment, unable to move, and then I turned my gaze back to the crosswalk. I don't know why, but something made me glance at the other side of the street again. The same spot where the woman had stood before, where I had seen her waiting for me. She wasn't there anymore. In fact, there was nothing there at all. No street lamp, no sign, no alleyway that led somewhere. It was as though the entire corner had been wiped away. The buildings across the street were gone, the pavement swallowed up by a stretch of darkness. It was empty, a gaping hole in the city's fabric. A sudden chill ran down my spine, and I looked back at the light. Red. Still red. I took a step forward. But just as my foot hit the pavement, the light blinked. For a split second, the red turned green, flickering, so briefly that I almost didn't believe it. I took another step, and as I did, the light flickered again. And this time, when it turned green, I didn't hesitate. I crossed the street, feeling the damp coolness of the road beneath my feet, feeling the weight lift as I reached the other side. But as I stepped onto the curb, I turned around, just to glance back. The crosswalk was empty now, just as it had been before. No one else was standing there. No woman, no man with the umbrella, no cars. Nothing. I stood there, my heart pounding, wondering if any of it had really happened. Had she really told me to wait? Had I really stood there, waiting for a light that would never change? I couldn't tell anymore. And then, as I walked away, the light blinked red again.